It is 5:45 in the morning on a beautiful Tiki Technical Tuesday, and we are going to wake up together doing production casting on the Volcanic Vapor mugs. Now that the slip is mixing and my timer is set, it's time for round one of mold Tetris. And that is where I've got to move the 20 production molds for the 10 Volcanic Vapor mugs around in my small studio. I'm going to be doing a lot of ping-ponging between my work table and the slip table. As you can see, filling the top sections of the Volcanic Vapor mug is no biggie. Super easy mold. I mean, it can't get any easier than this. Now, things are different for the big main sections of the mug. It's got a very narrow neck, and that neck is split into two little channels, and I've got to be careful to let air out of one of those channels while I'm putting slip into the other channel. If I get it wrong, I get a lot of turbulence. I might catch an air bubble in the casting. This is the point in the morning where I pretty much wake up because I gotta really focus and not screw up these, or else it's gonna be really difficult for us to seam them later on. Now that they're all filled, I hit the timer and we let these guys sit for 55 minutes. I put these plastic things on top so that the top layer of the slip doesn't skin over. Ta-da! Oops, I forgot something. Hello? All right, okay, here we go. All right, 55 minutes has passed, and it's time to flip the molds. I put these little wooden rails on the edge of my slip table so I can get an optimum draining angle once I flip these guys. And flipping is a pretty straightforward process. It begins with, once again, mold Tetris. I put a few molds back onto my work table just to give myself some elbow room to drain these things. And draining is just like it sounds. You just flip over the mold and dump it out. I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of proud of my two-fisted mold draining technique that I'm doing for the top sections of the mugs. Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty, the big sections. And just like they were challenging to fill, they're challenging to drain. You've gotta let the air go into that one opening as the slip comes out of the other. It's just a little trickier and just takes a little more time than a normal wide mouth mug. Wait for it. So these guys have sat here for 10 minutes so they can completely drain and just start to kind of gel before we move on to the next step, which is trimming the tops. So these molds have these wide, flat, open tops so that I can do this. I can go around the tops with this, my flexible kidney tool, and easily get a nice, clean, straight edge for me to join with the body of the mug. Now, I didn't think of this idea. I saw this by watching other much more talented ceramic artists on Instagram, mainly at Hammerly Ceramics, who does incredible work, and I highly recommend you check him out. Once I've got all the tops done, I move on to the bodies. The exact same trick as before, and the only difference is these are a little bit heavier. If you're wondering, this mold with the clay inside of it is exactly 20 pounds. So casting, as you can see, is a very repetitive process, and you just kind of get into this Zen action of doing the same thing again and again and doing it as best as you possibly can. I put the plastic tops on top of these as they dry out because I want them to dry through the walls of the mold, not through the top of the mold. Before our last round of mold Tetris, I like to clean the table up, get it ready for casting the next day, and then I will wrap it with plastic to keep the slip from drying out that's inside, and I put all of the drying molds back on top of this so I can use my work table again. All right, it is breakfast time. We are going to let these things sit here for 2 hours. It's currently 7:30, and yeah, we'll be back at 9:30 to crack them open and start seaming. Back from breakfast, it is 9:30, and we are going to start demolding all of today's castings. We're going to demold them, and then we have to stick them together, and then we seam them. That's the plan. It's okay, it's okay. After I pop the top sections out of the molds, I run them along a sponge like this to get the bottoms nice, clean, and smooth, and then I keep them under this Tupperware until they are ready to attach to the bottoms. It keeps it from drying out. So now that we've got all the tops out, we're going to switch on to the main body of the mug. I'm going to demold those, clean up the molds so they're ready for the next day's casting, and then I'm going to put the tops onto the base and then set those aside so that Denise and I can then get rid of the seam lines on them. Let's do it. So the first thing I do before I even open the main mold is clean up the bottom of the casting, just so that the edges are nice and crisp. It's easy to do it while it's still sitting in the mold. I then use these automotive tools. I don't know what they are, but they're great for prying open molds. And I painstakingly clean off all of the flashing or the extra clay on the inside of the mold before I close it up for tomorrow's casting. It's amazing how much time is spent just resetting the molds for the next day's castings. It's, yeah, you want to keep them clean or else you won't get a good cast. Now it's time to join the bottom and top sections together. Just like I did for the top, I use the sponge to get things nice and level, and then I go back and I actually trim the edge. I want the edge to be a little smaller than the top section so that it looks like the bubble is kind of going into the top cap. This little bead of slip acts just like glue and bonds the two sections of the mug together. So this one is ready to get seamed. I put it over on Denise's work table and I just go to town and do all of the rest of the mugs. My favorite thing about this time lapse is watching the ray of sun move across my clay table while I do it. So while I'm back there opening the molds, Denise is here seaming them. Ta-da! So it's not just me, it's a team effort always. You gonna say hi or anything? No? So now we get into the nitty-gritty of seaming. What is seaming? Well, it's removing this line from the casting where the two halves of the mold join together. It's a tricky business, and you want to spend a lot of time getting into these little fiddly bits like this. We use multiple tools. I use like a needle for weird shapes like this. After the needle, I will go back in with, I've got this little sponge on a stick, does a great job. And then I will even use some very fine paintbrushes to just smooth out and erase any tool marks. In addition to removing all the seams, we've got to cut the hole in the back of the mug. Now, fortunately, I put into the sculpture a kind of guideline for me to follow with the X-Acto knife. It makes it a lot easier to remove this and make each mug identical. And once we cut this out, then we've got to go back in and smooth out that hole. And I smooth out the bottom. Lots of smoothing. Lots and lots and lots of smoothing. Okay, it is 12:20. I just finished seaming the last one. We'd usually be done a little earlier than this, but Denise had to do some errands today, so I ended up seaming more than I usually do. We usually split it. Well, actually, she does most of the seaming because I do most of the demolding. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. We're going to put this one with the others on the temporary drying rack. And I call this temporary because they're going to sit here for an hour or so to just firm up, and then I will put the edition numbers on the bottom. And once I do that, they will be transferred over to the actual drying rack over here. Yeah, I put them over here temporarily so that I don't forget to put the edition numbers on the bottom. I use my handy-dandy DIY casting log to keep track of the edition numbers. I mark down how many pieces I cast that day, how long they sat in the mold, and it lives here right above the slip table for reference. Alrighty, back from lunch. Let's get some numbers onto these guys. We're looking at 36 through 45 today. I know that this is saying 38 instead of 36, but give me a break. I had to, do another take for the close-up shot. So last week's castings have dried enough that I am able to fire them for the first firing, the bisque firing. So I'm going to grab these, and we're going to find out today just how many we can fit in the kiln at one time. So kiln loading is just a whole nother form of ceramics Tetris. Each mug has its own shape, so you never really know how many you're going to be able to fire until you just get in there and start doing it. And you can see me counting these as I go, because I'm very curious how many I can do. All right, we actually got 31 of them in there. I probably could have put a little more in, but I think that for the glaze firing, we'll probably only be able to do 30. You can't pack them as tightly during the glaze firing because the glaze will stick to you don't want it to touch, they'll stick together. So yeah, 30 per firing is fantastic. That's actually how many we were able to fit with the puka pounders. These have a nice small footprint, so even though I can only stack them too high, that's a good number. I'll take 30. And there you have it, a day in production on the Volcanic Vapors mugs. I am putting my tools away, cleaning up, and getting ready to do it all again tomorrow morning. We will be doing this for the next 4 weeks or so. Yeah, and now you know how it's done, from pouring all the way to bisque. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next week.